Working the oil fields on Alaska's North Slope isn't something most people can handle for long. The isolation wears you down. Endless white tundra, months of darkness, and a cold that feels alive. I'd been doing pipeline maintenance near Prudhoe Bay for about 6 years when this happened. February of 2018. The pay was excellent. Honestly, the only reason guys like me, Brad, and Tommy kept signing up rotation after rotation. We were a solid crew. The kind that trusted each other completely, because up there, one mistake or one equipment failure could kill you before help ever reached you. That week, we'd wrapped up a long repair job on a pipeline section damaged by constant freeze-thaw stress. Once finished, the company housed us in one of those prefab shelters roughly 40 miles south of Dead Horse, right off the Dalton Highway, the ice road the truckers run. The drive back should have been uneventful. We'd done it countless times in Brad's heavily modified Ford F350, chains on all 4 tires, upgraded heating build specifically so you wouldn't freeze solid if something went wrong. Tommy was passed out in the back seat, making up for lost sleep, while I rode shotgun and kept Brad company as he drove straight into what was turning into a serious snowstorm. On a good stretch, visibility was maybe 30 feet. The headlights reflected off the blowing snow, creating this strange white tunnel that almost felt hypnotic, like we were drifting through space. About 2 hours into the drive, Brad suddenly slammed on the brakes. The force threw Tommy forward into the back of my seat. Through the storm, barely visible, was someone walking along the side of the road. No vehicle, no flares, no hazard lights. Just a lone figure wearing what looked like a heavy parka, moving with the frantic, uneven steps of someone succumbing to hypothermia. Brad pulled over without hesitation. You don't leave anyone outside in weather like that, especially when it's 40 below and dropping fast. Tommy snapped awake, yelling about the sudden stop, but went quiet the second he saw what was ahead of us. We sat there for a few seconds, watching the man struggle through knee-deep snow about 20 yards up the road. His parka looked old military surplus, olive green, with a fur-lined hood whipping violently in the wind. Something felt off immediately. He wasn't stumbling like someone freezing to death. His movements were stiff, repetitive, almost programmed, like he was following a path only he could see. Brad honked twice. The man didn't react, didn't even turn his head. He just kept moving forward, arms hanging loosely at his sides. Jesus, he's gonna die out here, Tommy muttered, already reaching for the door. Brad put the truck in park, and we all stepped out. The wind hit us like 1,000 razor blades. Even with our heavy gear, the cold clawed through every seam and zipper. We jogged toward him, shouting, but the storm swallowed our voices whole. When we got close, Brad grabbed the man's shoulder to spin him around. That's when everything changed. His face was ghostly pale paper white, but not frostbitten. His eyes were a cloudy gray, like dirty ice, and they didn't seem to focus on us at all. He had a few days' worth of dark stubble that stood out sharply against his unnatural skin. His lips kept moving non-stop, forming words we couldn't hear over the wind. Then there was the scar. A jagged line ran from his left temple down to his jaw, an injury that screamed survival against impossible odds. Brad instinctively stepped back. "Sir, are you okay?" Tommy yelled, waving a hand inches from the man's face. No response. The man swayed slightly, staring past us, past the storm, past everything. His lips never stopped moving. And when I leaned in, ignoring every instinct screaming at me to back away, I finally heard what he was saying. 247, 247, 2-4-7. Over and over, like a malfunctioning machine. Brad and Tommy exchanged uneasy looks. We'd all heard stories about people losing their minds from isolation up here, but this felt different. Wrong, in a way I couldn't put into words. Still, leaving him wasn't an option. Morals aside, Abandoning him would mean explaining a frozen body to state troopers later, and none of us wanted that. It took all three of us to guide him back to the truck. He didn't fight, but he didn't help either. He moved like a mannequin, stiff and unnaturally cold through his parka. What scared me most? He wasn't shivering. Anyone who spent time in the Arctic knows shivering is your body's last defense. When it stops, you're in real danger. His skin was ice cold, yet his body was completely still. We put him in the back seat with Tommy, who pressed himself against the door like he wanted to disappear. Brad blasted the heater and pulled back onto the Dalton Highway. For 10 straight minutes, no one spoke. The only sounds were the roaring heater fan and those lips quietly moving, repeating the same numbers. Finally, Tawny broke the silence. "Guys, doesn't he look like that missing snowmobiler from a few years back?" Brad's hands tightened on the steering wheel. I remembered. Everyone on the slope did. February 2016, a local man named Christopher Vaughn vanished during a solo snowmobile trip. His sled was found wrapped around a tree about 15 miles from where we'd picked this guy up. Blood on the seat. Drag marks into the woods that just stopped. Search crews looked for 2 weeks before calling it. In that kind of cold, without shelter, you only last hours. He was declared dead, memorial service and all. His brother worked for one of the drilling companies, used to drink at the same bar in Dead Horse. He'd mentioned Christopher had a scar exactly like that from a childhood boating accident. The longer I stared at our passenger in the rearview mirror, the worse my stomach felt. Same scar, same biz, same build. Even the same eye color except in the photos, Christopher's eyes were brown. Not this lifeless, milky gray. Through the storm, the shelter finally emerged, a metal box glowing faintly yellow, like an oasis in a frozen void. We radioed ahead, but only got static, which wasn't unusual in weather like this. The shelter was one of those modular units scattered along the pipeline route. Basically, a reinforced shipping container with bunks, a small kitchenette, and basic communications. Brad pulled the truck in as close to the shelter door as he could, and we got ready to move our passenger inside. That's when he spoke his first words since we found him. His voice was rough, distorted, like it was forcing its way through ice-cold water. "I can't go in, not yet. Not until 2:47. Tommy flinched so hard, he cracked his head against the doorframe. But there was no way we were leaving someone outside to freeze, no matter what they said. Brad wrapped his arms around the man from behind while Tommy and I each grabbed one of his arms. It was awkward and tense, but we managed to haul him through the doorway. The instant we crossed inside, his body went completely slack. All his weight dropped at once, nearly pulling us to the floor. We struggled to keep our footing and laid him out on one of the lower bunks. Brad headed straight for the radio room, while Tommy put water on to boil for coffee. I stayed behind with the man, checking his pulse slow, but consistent, and trying to process everything that had happened so far. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, new details became impossible to ignore. His fingernails were far too long, yellowed and curved, like they hadn't been trimmed in months. And then there was the smell or lack of it. Someone wandering in the Arctic should stink of sweat, grime, something. But there was nothing at all. No scent. Just a strange, sterile emptiness. I checked his parka pockets. Empty except for one thing. A snowmobile key attached to a cracked leather fob, the kind sold at the Dead Horse gas station. The leather was old and weathered, and stamped into it were the words, C. Vaughn -2015. My chest tightened. Tommy walked back in with the coffee and froze when he saw what I was holding. The color drained from his face as he set the mugs down too hard, spilling coffee across the counter. That's not possible," he whispered, but it was right there in my hand. Brad came back from the radio room shaking his head. The storm was knocking out all communication. We weren't going anywhere until it passed, probably another 8 to 10 hours. That's when the lights flickered. Just once, but it was enough to make all of us look up. These shelters had backup generators that kicked in automatically. Power issues were rare. The lights steadied again, but the room felt different. Our passenger's eyes were open. He was staring straight at the wall clock. 11:30 p.m. His lips began moving again, faster now, repeating the same words like a chant. 2:47. Tommy grabbed my arm, hard enough that I knew it would bruise. "We need to leave," he said urgently. "Now, storm or not." Brad didn't even argue. He just pointed at the window. The snow was coming down so thick we couldn't see the truck sitting barely 10 feet away. We were stuck. And somewhere deep in the primitive part of my brain, I had the awful sense that this was exactly how it was meant to be. The hours that followed dragged by painfully slow. We took turns watching the man while pretending everything was normal. Brad made sandwiches that nobody touched. Tommy cleaned his tools for the third time. I kept checking outside, hoping for even the smallest break in the storm. The man never shifted. He lay there motionless, eyes locked on the clock, lips quietly counting down. Around 2 a.m., exhaustion finally caught up to us. Tommy volunteered to take first watch while Brad and I lay down on bunks across the room. I didn't think sleep was possible, but the adrenaline crash hit hard, and I was out instantly. I woke to Tommy shaking me violently. His face was white with panic. The clock read 2:46 a.m. Brad was already on his feet near the door, gripping a heavy wrench. "He's gone," Tommy gasped. I just looked away for a second, just to check the coffee, and when I turned back, the bunk was empty. We searched the entire shelter, all 40 feet of it. There was nowhere he could have gone, no hiding spots, no exits we hadn't seen. He had simply disappeared. Then we heard it. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the metal door, each one spaced perfectly apart. 2:47 a.m. The knocking came again, this time from the north window. Then the south, then back to the door. It moved around the shelter, methodical, like something was testing every possible way in. Brad tightened his grip on the wrench. "That's not possible," he said. "No one could survive out there without gear." But we all knew the man we picked up hadn't been normal to begin with. At 2:48, the knocking stopped. The silence afterward was unbearable, so complete, it felt like pressure building in our ears. None of us moved until morning. When the storm finally cleared around 7 a.m., we stepped outside and immediately ran for the truck. There were no footprints. None around the door, none beneath the windows. No tracks leading away. The snow was flawless, untouched. But Tommy never made it to the truck. Brad and I turned around, and he was gone. No sound, no struggle, no tracks, just empty space where he'd been standing seconds earlier. We drove nonstop until we reached Fairbanks, filed a missing person report, told them about picking up a stranger, left out the part about him possibly being Christopher Vaughn. 3 days later, they found Tommy, 15 miles from the shelter, in the exact spot where Vaughn's snowmobile had crashed years earlier. Frozen solid, lips blue, drag marks in the snow. That simply ended. The overnight shifts at the mile 237 fuel stop felt endless, each night blurring into the next until time stopped mattering. I'd been working there since early November, standing behind the counter while Arctic winds rattled the windows and semis rolled by on the Dalton Highway like silent apparitions. For a broke college student trying to save money, the pay was decent. And the owner, an older man named Eugene, never questioned it when I asked for extra hours. Most nights were uneventful. Truckers grabbing coffee, locals topping off their tanks, maybe a lost traveler who'd underestimated the weather. The station itself was barely worth mentioning. 2 gas pumps out front, a tiny convenience store stocked with overpriced junk food, and a bathroom that only worked when the pipes weren't frozen solid. Everything changed on my third Wednesday working there. Just after 2 a.m., I noticed headlights pushing through the snowstorm outside. An old Chevy pickup, its blue paint eaten away by rust, pulled up to pump number 4 and stopped. The driver didn't step out, didn't shut off the engine, didn't even move. Through the frost-coated windshield, all I could see was a dark shape sitting behind the wheel. After about 10 minutes, I figured maybe the guy had stalled out or nodded off. I grabbed my jacket to check on him, but before I reached the door, the truck suddenly backed up and vanished into the storm. It was strange, sure, but out there, strange was normal. I logged it in the station notebook and went back to restocking energy drinks, assuming that was the end of it. It wasn't. The following Wednesday brought an even worse storm. Visibility dropped to maybe 20 feet, and the wind made the building groan like it might come apart. Eugene had warned me about nights like that. Said sometimes even the truckers would pull over and wait it out rather than risk the highway. I was in the back room counting inventory when I heard the low rumble of an engine outside. I checked the clock. 2 a.m. exactly. On the security monitor, I watched that same blue Chevy roll in and stop at pump 4. Same position, same behavior. The driver didn't move at all. This time, the camera angle was clearer. The man wore a thick winter coat with the hood pulled up, his hands locked on the steering wheel at perfect 10 and 2. He never shifted, never reached for the radio, never even appeared to breathe. I let it go on for 15 minutes before deciding to step outside. The moment I reached for the door, keys in hand, the truck's reverse lights flicked on. By the time I fought my way through the snow to pump 4, the Chevy was gone, only faint tire tracks left behind, already filling in under fresh snowfall. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling something was wrong. There was something unnatural about the way he sat there, too still, too precise, like watching the same moment repeat itself on a loop. Every set of headlights after that made my stomach tighten. When Eugene arrived for the morning shift, I mentioned it casually. He shrugged it off, saying, "You get all kinds out here, especially in storm season." But he wouldn't look me in the eye, and his fingers tapped nervously against the counter. By the third Wednesday, I came prepared. I swapped shifts with Jasmine so I'd be on duty at 2 a.m., though I didn't tell her why. The station security system was old, but functional early 2000s tech that looped footage every 7 days. I'd figured out how to save clips onto a USB drive, and I kept one in my pocket. That night's weather was calmer, steady snowfall. Instead of a full blizzard, mean visibility was better. I stood behind the counter with a clear view of pump 4, pretending to flip through a magazine. At 1:58 a.m., I heard it. That unmistakable engine sound growing louder from the north. The blue Chevy emerged from the darkness like it had been summoned, pulling into the exact same spot with unsettling precision. I zoomed the camera in as far as it would go. What I saw made my skin crawl. The driver wasn't just motionless, he was impossibly still. No rise and fall of his chest. No minor adjustments. Nothing. His face stayed hidden under the hood, but his hands looked wrong. The skin was grayish, even accounting for the bad camera quality, and his fingers were stiff, as if frozen solid around the wheel. I recorded everything, my heart pounding as he sat there for exactly 10 minutes. Then, right on schedule, the reverse lights came on. But this time, the truck didn't back straight out. It turned slightly, angling the driver's side toward the camera. The hood slipped back just enough for me to see his face, and I stumbled backward, crashing into the cigarette display. He looked human, but only barely. Hollow eyes that reflected no light, skin like dried leather, an expression completely devoid of awareness or emotion. Nothing about him suggested a living person. The truck disappeared into the snow before I could catch my breath. I spent the next hour replaying the footage, hoping I'd imagined it. blaming the lighting, the camera, anything. But every replay confirmed it. Whatever sat in that truck was wrong. I saved multiple copies of the video and started digging through the station's old records. Eugene kept everything dusty binders stacked in a storage closet behind the break room. Delivery logs, maintenance reports, incident notes dating all the way back to 1987. That's when I found the first mention. December 1993, a brief note about a customer complaint. An abandoned vehicle at Pump 4 around 2 a.m. blue Chevy pickup. Lone male driver. Never exits the truck. More entries followed. Always Wednesdays. Always winter storms. Always exactly 2 a.m. Then I found a folder labeled Law Enforcement. Incident reports. Inside were photocopied police records, missing person flyers, and old newspaper clippings. One stood out immediately. A January 1992 article about a local man named Walter Ricks, who vanished during a severe blizzard while driving home from a mining camp. His truck, a blue 1988 Chevy Silverado, was never found. Even in the grainy newspaper photo, I recognized those hollow features. But the final document made my hands shake. Someone had run the license plate 2 years earlier. The plate belonged to Walter Ricks, according to DMV records. It was registered to a vehicle declared missing in January 1992. Over 30 years ago, I tried calling Eugene. Straight to voicemail. The next Wednesday was only 2 days away. I couldn't decide whether to quit on the spot or stay and confront whatever kept coming back to Pump 4. In the end, curiosity won, along with a strange sense of responsibility. Like I owed Walter answers, wherever he truly was. I spent the next 2 days digging into everything I could about Walter's disappearance. He was only 28 when he vanished, working rotating shifts at the Red Dog mine, leaving behind a wife and a newborn daughter. Search efforts had been crippled by the storm, that night near zero visibility and temperatures plunging to 40 below. One detail in the police report stood out. Walter's final radio call mentioned that he was stopping for fuel. He never said where. Based on the timeline, that would have placed him near mile 237 around. 2 am right when the blizzard reached its worst. The deeper I searched, the worse it got. Newspaper archives showed 3 other disappearances along that same stretch of highway over the years. All happened during winter storms, all late at night. None of the people were ever found. Wednesday arrived with clear skies for once. Stars shone through the station windows, and the temperature sat around -20. I convinced myself the pattern might finally break, that whatever brought Walter's truck back only came with the storms. I was wrong. At 1:45 a.m., clouds rolled in out of nowhere. Snow followed soon after, falling thick and heavy. By 1:55, visibility was nearly gone. I knew then he was coming. I'd prepared for it. Fresh batteries in my flashlight. My phone fully charged. Eugene's number set to speed dial. And a baseball bat from the storage room hidden behind the counter. At exactly 2 a.m., those familiar headlights cut through the snow. The blue Chevy pulled into Pump 4 with the same unnatural precision. Walter, or whatever was left of him, sat behind the wheel, locked in his endless vigil. This time, I didn't wait. I grabbed the flashlight and the bat, took a steadying breath, and stepped outside. The cold slammed into me, stealing my breath and burning my eyes instantly. Snow spun wildly in the wind, turning the world into a white void broken only by the glow of the station lights and the idling truck. As I forced my way toward Pump 4, I noticed something the cameras had never shown. The snow around the truck behaved. Wrong. A perfect circle surrounded the vehicle where not a single snowflake touched it. Even stranger, the windows showed no fog, no condensation. The inside looked just as frozen as the air outside. I reached the driver's door. My flashlight caught Walter's face in profile. Up close, it was worse. Skin like dried parchment stretched tightly over bone. eyes wide open but utterly empty, lips slightly parted, as if caught in the middle of a word that never finished. I raised my hand to knock. The instant my knuckles touched the glass, the power died. The pumps went dark. The station behind me vanished into pitch black. Even my flashlight flickered and went out. In that sudden silence, I heard the truck's door creak open. The backup generator should have kicked in within seconds. It didn't. I stumbled backward, swinging the bat blindly while fumbling with the flashlight, my fingers numb and useless. That's when I saw the light. A soft, pale glow was coming from inside the station. Not the harsh fluorescent lights, but something dim and unnatural. Through the falling snow, I could see a figure standing inside, completely still, facing outward. Its proportions were wrong. Too tall, too thin. But I recognized the coat. I recognized the face. Walter stood inside the locked station, on the wrong side of the glass, staring directly at me. Frost spread outward from where he stood, crawling across the window in branching patterns like frozen veins. The worst part? I could still hear the truck idling behind me. I turned my head just enough to confirm it. The driver's seat was empty. The door hung open like a gaping mouth. When I looked back at the station, Walter had moved closer to the glass. Close enough for me to see every detail of his ruined face. His empty eyes locked onto mine, filling my chest with pure panic. Then he spoke. The voice sounded like wind pushing through frozen metal, muffled by the glass, but clear enough to understand. Still looking for pump 4. Each word was slow and strained. With every syllable, more frost spread across the window until the entire storefront was sealed in ice. I backed away, slipping in the snow, the bat shaking uselessly in my hands. Behind me, the truck's engine suddenly revved. The headlights flashed in a deliberate pattern, too rhythmic to be random. Inside the station, the pale glow pulsed in time with the lights. That's when I realized Walter wasn't alone. Shadows moved behind him. More figures stepped into view 4 in total, including Walter. Each wore winter gear. Each stared out with the same hollow eyes. The same mouths moving together, silently. The frost on the glass began forming words. Help us find the way. I ran. Not toward the truck. Not toward the highway. I sprinted around the building to the employee entrance, fumbling with my keys, while those dead eyes followed me through every window. The door finally opened, and I slammed it shut behind me, throwing the deadbolt. The emergency lights snapped on. The store was empty. No figures, no frost. Just shelves, counters, and the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. But the truck was still there. I could hear it idling at pump 4. I called 911 with shaking hands, rambling about intruders and power failures. Anything to get someone there. While I waited, I grabbed the USB drive with the footage and stuffed it into my pocket. That's when I noticed the clock. It read 2:47 a.m., but my phone said only 10 minutes had passed since the power went out. When the officer arrived, there was nothing. No truck. No footprints except mine. No frost damage. Nothing out of place. The next morning, I quit. Packed up, left Alaska for good. But sometimes, on heavy winter nights, I still dream about pump 4. And those words etched in ice. I never learned what they were searching for. And honestly, I hope I never do. October 2019 marked the point where everything between my father and me quietly broke apart. We'd been planning a moose hunt in Alaska's Copper River Basin for months, our first real father-son trip since I moved to Seattle for work 3 years earlier. I was 28, working in consulting, and truthfully, I hadn't spent more than a couple of days alone with him since college. My dad, on the other hand, knew that region like muscle memory. He'd been hunting there for over 20 years. Every ridge, every creek bend, Every shortcut through the brush, it was all second nature to him. We drove up from Anchorage in his old but reliable Chevy Silverado, rifles secured in the back, camping gear packed tight. For once, we were both genuinely excited to unplug for 5 days. No cell service, no emails, just wilderness. The plan was simple: track moose, hope for a clean shot, and enjoy the silence. Day one couldn't have gone better. We hiked about 6 miles from where we parked and set up camp near a narrow creek cutting through a valley surrounded by thick spruce and birch. Dad slipped easily into his woodsman mode, pointing out tracks, reading the wind, telling stories from past hunts. The weather was cold but manageable, maybe mid-30s, with clear skies and that soft autumn light filtering through the trees. We pitched a tent, sorted our gear, and spent the evening mapping out the next day's route while sharing coffee laced with whiskey. We talked quietly, family stuff, work, life. Everything felt calm, normal, almost healing. Neither of us realized we weren't alone. The second day was when things turned strange. We'd been hiking for around 3 hours, following a game trail that climbed through rocky outcrops when my dad suddenly stopped. His body language shifted instantly from relaxed to alert. He was staring at something about 30 yards ahead, his expression tight with confusion. When I stepped up beside him, I saw why. Scattered across the ground were the remains of a caribou, but not like any kill I'd ever seen. The bones were stripped completely clean, almost unnaturally so. But what made my stomach turn was the arrangement. The remains weren't scattered randomly like a predator's feeding site. They had been placed deliberately. The larger bones formed a rough circle around a flat boulder. The skull sat dead center, empty eye sockets staring upward, with the rest radiating outward like spokes on a wheel. Dad crouched beside it, running his fingers along the bone edges. He'd seen bear kills, wolf packs, even mountain lion work. This wasn't any of that. The cuts were too clean, too precise, and there wasn't a single track in the soft earth around it. No paw prints, no scuffs, nothing. "Kevin," he said quietly, using my full name, the version he only used when something was seriously wrong. "I've never seen anything like this. Whatever did this was strong enough to take down a full-grown caribou, and smart enough to leave nothing behind." We searched the area for another 10 minutes, widening our circle, but found nothing. No blood trail, no disturbed brush, no sign of entry or exit. It was as if something had appeared, arranged the bones with care, and disappeared. We tried to shrug it off and kept moving, but neither of us was comfortable anymore. Dad kept glancing back toward the site. I got myself scanning the tree line far more than usual. About 2 miles farther along, we found another one. This time, it was a ptarmigan. Small, delicate, and laid out in the same unnatural pattern. Tiny bones arranged in a perfect circle around a smooth river stone, the skull placed precisely in the center. What disturbed me most was what wasn't there. No feathers, no signs of a struggle. Ptarmigans are easy prey foxes, hawks, anything, but this wasn't a kill. It was preparation. Dad lifted one of the wing bones, holding it up to the light. It had been cleaned down to bare bone with incredible care. "This is surgical," he murmured. "Animals don't do this." And it didn't stop. We found 5 more sites that day. A ground squirrel arranged around quartz, a marten's bone circling a flat piece of shale. Every scene pristine, sterile, carefully constructed. What really unsettled us was the progression. The deeper we went into the basin, the fresher the remains became. The first caribou had been dead for weeks. The last few still carried the sharp, metallic scent of recent death. Dad changed after that. He kept his rifle ready, checked behind us constantly. Neither of us said it out loud, but we both felt it. Something was ahead of us. Watching, waiting, leaving markers. It felt like we were being guided deeper into its territory, following a trail meant to be found, part warning, part invitation. That night, we made camp in a small clearing surrounded by dense spruce. Neither of us wanted to push farther. Dad insisted on keeping the fire burning all night and taking turns on watch, something we'd never done before. I took the first shift, sitting against a fallen log with my rifle across my knees, listening to every snap and rustle beyond the firelight. Around 2 a.m. during Dad's watch, he whispered my name urgently. When I opened my eyes, he was pointing toward the far edge of the clearing, his face pale in the flickering orange glow. "There," he breathed. "Between those spruces, don't move fast. Tell me what you see." I turned slowly, and my blood went cold. Two massive yellow eyes reflected the firelight set at least 8 feet off the ground, completely still. Not the green shine of a deer or moose, but a deep golden glow that felt aware. They watched us without blinking, without shifting. Just that steady, calculating stare. It probably lasted 15 minutes, but it felt endless. Dad kept his rifle trained on the spot, but we couldn't see a body. No outline, no movement, just the eyes. Whatever was standing there was enormous, and it wasn't afraid of us at all. The height of those eyes alone told me it wasn't any wolf or bear I'd ever crossed paths with. What unsettled me even more was the silence. No breathing, no shifting weight, no branches moving, just complete stillness. Those eyes fixed on us with the calm patience of a predator that knew it had all the time in the world. When morning finally came and the forest began to glow with that dull gray pre-dawn light, the eyes were simply gone. No movement, no retreat. 1 second they existed, then nothing. Once there was enough light, we searched the clearing carefully, expecting at least some sign we hadn't imagined it. But there were no tracks, no broken brush, not a single mark suggesting anything had stood there at all. Day 3 was the breaking point. We'd been hiking for nearly 4 hours, both of us exhausted and on edge from the night before. When we reached the ridge overlooking the main valley, Dad raised his binoculars to scan for moose, and then he froze completely. "Jesus Christ," he whispered, lowering them with shaking hands and passing them to me. "Tell me I'm not losing it." I focused the lenses where he was pointing. On the opposite ridge, roughly 800 yards away, stood a wolf. At least, that's what it resembled. Calling it a wolf felt wrong the moment I saw it. This thing was massive, easily the size of a small horse. Its head and shoulders were impossibly broad, its proportions far beyond any normal canine. Its coat was nearly pitch black, broken only by strange silver streaks running along its spine, catching the sunlight like polished metal. But what made my chest tighten was the way it stood perfectly still, facing directly toward us, as if it had known exactly when we would arrive there, as if it had been waiting. It remained motionless for nearly 2 minutes, watching us with what had to be incredible eyesight at that distance. Even from so far away, I could feel its attention pressing down on us, like it was memorizing every movement, every reaction. Dad tried to steady his rifle, but the distance made any shot useless. Then the wolf turned. No warning, no hesitation. It began moving along the ridgeline with a smooth, flowing gait that didn't look natural. It moved like a living shadow, covering ground impossibly fast, while keeping perfect balance on terrain that would challenge an experienced climber. Every 100 yards or so, it would stop, turn, look back at us, and wait just long enough for us to relocate it before continuing on. It wasn't fleeing. It was demonstrating, showing us that it could move wherever it wanted, however it wanted, that it had been in control the entire time. That's when everything finally made sense. The arranged bones, the kills growing fresher as we went deeper, the silent eyes watching us at night. This wasn't coincidence. We hadn't been exploring its territory. We were the ones being hunted. This wasn't an animal acting on instinct or defending ground. Whatever this was, it was calculating, intentional. It had shadowed us from the beginning, staying just close enough to observe, leaving those grotesque displays as markers, messages. Dad must have reached the same conclusion because he grabbed my arm hard and said, "We're done. We're leaving now. This thing has been playing with us." We packed up in a panic, abandoning the hunt entirely. As we started back down toward the valley, I took one last look through the binoculars. The wolf was still there. Now it was sitting calm, almost regal, watching us retreat. And I swear there was something like satisfaction in its posture. The hike back to the truck took 6 straight hours of non-stop movement. We constantly scanned the ridgelines and tree lines, expecting to see it again. We barely spoke, but I knew Dad was thinking the same thing I was. That creature had orchestrated everything. Every kill site, every unsettling discovery, every step deeper into the basin had been part of a deliberate design guiding us until it decided to show itself. When we finally reached the Silverado, Dad threw our gear into the bed with trembling hands and started the engine before I even had my door shut. As we drove away, I watched the wilderness fade in the side mirror, and I could still feel those golden eyes following us. We never returned. The following spring, Dad sold all his hunting gear. We never talked about what happened, but we didn't need to. We both knew we encountered something that wasn't supposed to exist. An apex predator with intelligence that felt almost supernatural. And somehow, we've been allowed to leave its territory alive. The Caribou Migration Project seemed like a dream. Opportunity to finally step up in my career as a wildlife biologist. After 6 years spent on smaller, supporting research assignments, I was finally given the chance to lead a study, examining how climate change was affecting the traditional migration paths along the Yukon River. The assignment came through in late April 2017. And within 2 weeks, I was heading deep into the Canadian wilderness with a 5-person team. Our mission was to monitor 43 caribou, fitted with GPS collars over a 3-week period, documenting their movements and behaviors. The data we collected could influence regional conservation strategies, making this one of the most important projects I had ever led. I remember a mix of excitement and weighty responsibility as we loaded our geothermal drones, tracking equipment, and enough camping supplies to survive in such a remote location for weeks. We established our base camp at an abandoned logging site. Deserted since the 1980s, the location was ideal. Flat ground for setting up equipment, easy access to river water, and positioned along a primary caribou migration corridor. Yet there was something about the site that felt off. Rusting machinery jutted from the earth, half swallowed by moss, while rotting wooden structures slowly collapsed into the surrounding forest. My team included Dr. James Mitchell, an experienced project leader, Lisa Chun from the university's wildlife department, and 2 graduate students, Alex and Maria. Since we had worked together on prior projects, we quickly re-established routines for campsite management, daily tasks, and research workflow. The first few days went smoothly. GPS signals from all 43 caribou were stable and precise. Each morning, we gathered around the camp stove with coffee, watching dozens of red dots shift across the digital maps as the animals clustered in feeding areas during the day and moved northward at night. Lisa piloted the thermal drones to capture behavioral footage, while Alex and Maria monitored radio frequencies. Dr. Mitchell and I analyzed movement patterns and recorded observations. The weather cooperated: cool mornings, warm afternoons, and clear nights, which made it ideal for both equipment and observation. By the 5th day, we were noticing deviations from historical migration patterns. The sort of information that could significantly increase the value of our research. Everything seemed orderly, predictable, and under control. Still, I began to notice odd details about the logging site. Some trees had perfectly straight-cut marks, far too precise to be natural, suggesting tools more advanced than one would expect for that era. Concrete foundations of destroyed buildings formed geometric shapes, appearing almost deliberately designed. Buried beneath decades of debris were metal plates stamped with sequential numbers, but no company name, no dates, nothing to identify their origin. Dr. Mitchell noted that logging operations from that time usually left clear traces marked trees, equipment numbers, signage, but this location seemed almost sterile. Scrub it of history. Despite these oddities, our focus remained on the research. But everything changed on the night of May 15th, around 11:30 p.m. I was reviewing data logs in my tent when Alex came running from the monitoring station, his face pale under the lantern light. "Heather, you have to see this now," he said, voice tight with urgency. Every single GPS signal 43 in total had disappeared at precisely 11:17 p.m., not gradually, not one by one, all at the same time, as if someone had flipped a single switch. There were no error messages, no equipment failures, nothing to explain the sudden blackout. Lisa ran diagnostics while Dr. Mitchell checked backup systems. We spent hours attempting to reconnect, adjusting frequencies, boosting signals, even manually pinging individual callers, but nothing worked. The caribou had simply vanished, leaving us staring at blank screens in disbelief. The silence afterward was unsettling. Normally, the forest would have been alive with nocturnal sounds, owls calling, branches creaking, small animals scuttling through the undergrowth. But after the GPS signals vanished, even those familiar noises seemed muted, replaced by a heavy, oppressive quiet that made my ears ring. We set up shifts to monitor the equipment through the night, hoping the signals might return as suddenly as they had disappeared. Dr. Mitchell took the first watch, then Lisa, followed by Alex, at 4 a.m. It was my turn, sitting alone in the monitoring tent surrounded by quiet equipment. I tried to make sense of the situation. GPS systems had never failed this completely before, and the fact that all signals dropped simultaneously suggested something far beyond a simple technical glitch. I kept reviewing the data logs, searching for patterns or overlooked clues. Dawn brought no clarity, only more questions. We packed quickly and hiked 6 miles, northeast to the last recorded location of the nearest caribou herd. The walk through the dense forest was tense, each of us lost in thought, anticipating what we might find. When we arrived, there was no trace of the animals, no tracks, no droppings, no sign they had ever been there. Yet all our monitoring equipment remained in place, fully functional, still recording as if nothing had happened. It was as though the caribou had vanished into thin air, leaving only our instruments behind. Lisa suggested we broaden the search radius, but Dr. Mitchell was anxious about time and resources. We spent the day combing a 12-mile area, finding nothing but empty forest and growing certainty that something unprecedented had occurred. That night, Lisa decided to review the thermal drone footage from the previous evening, hoping it might provide some clue about the caribou's mysterious disappearance. We all huddled around Lisa's laptop inside the main tent, scanning hours of grainy infrared footage. For the most part, it looked like what we expected: empty forest, occasional small critters moving through the undergrowth, the usual thermal traces of a quiet night in the wilderness. But at 11:15 p.m., just 2 minutes before the GPS signals vanished, the footage revealed something completely unexpected. 7 towering figures emerged from the edge of the trees. moving across the clearing with uncanny precision. They looked humanoid, yet something about them was off too tall, too synchronized, their movements unnaturally smooth, almost mechanical. The thermal readings indicated they were warmer than the surrounding air, but still cooler than a typical human body. What unnerved us the most was the way they moved as one, maintaining perfect spacing and identical motions across the clearing before disappearing silently back into the forest. No one spoke for several minutes after the footage ended. Dr. Mitchell rewound the clip multiple times, scrutinizing every detail, while Alex muttered anxiously about possible equipment errors. But Lisa and I could see clearly that what we were witnessing was real. Each figure stood around 8 feet tall, with elongated limbs and movements that suggested intimate familiarity with the terrain. They didn't make a sound. No leaves rustled, no logs creaked, and they navigated the dense undergrowth without disturbing a single branch. The coordination was the most chilling part. They weren't just walking in formation. They mirrored each other's gestures precisely. When the lead figure lifted an arm, all 7 followed suit, performing the exact same motion in perfect unison. We watched the footage repeatedly, but each viewing only deepened the mystery and heightened the fear that this was somehow connected to the caribou vanishing. That night, we instituted a buddy system. No one could leave a tent alone, and we checked in on each other every hour until dawn. Despite these precautions, I barely slept, straining to hear every sound outside and wondering if those figures were still lurking nearby. Around 3 a.m., I caught Maria whispering frantically to Alex in the adjacent tent. When I called out to see if something was wrong, she claimed it was just a nightmare. The rest of the night passed without further incident. Morning, however, brought a terror none of us were prepared for. At 7 a.m., during breakfast, we realized Alex was missing. His sleeping bag was empty, personal items still neatly arranged by his cot, and his boots were gone. We immediately scoured the area around the camp, calling his name and checking every possible hiding spot. Dr. Mitchell even suggested contacting authorities. On a hunch, I checked the riverbank, thinking Alex might have slipped while fetching water. What I found there was beyond explanation. Alex's hiking boots were placed perfectly on a flat rock, side by side, facing the river exactly as he always left them. The laces were tied neatly, the leather unmarked, and yet there were no footprints leading to or from the boots. Nothing at all in the soft soil to indicate how they had gotten there. Even the rock beneath them was completely dry, untouched by morning mist that had dampened everything else nearby. We spent 2 hours combing every inch of the surrounding ground, but there were absolutely no traces of movement. It was as if the boots had been placed by some invisible force. Terrified, we packed up the camp immediately and hiked to the nearest communication point to call in help. The search and rescue effort lasted 4 days, involving helicopters, trained dogs, and experienced wilderness teams, yet no sign of Alex was ever discovered. Officially, he was listed as missing and presumed dead, with the most plausible theory being that he had fallen into the river. But that explanation didn't account for the impossibly positioned boots, which the investigators dismissed entirely. 6 months later, a forestry worker contacted me. While surveying near the abandoned logging site, he'd uncovered something buried under a pile of stones, a GPS collar still operational, recording data that indicated it had remained exactly where it was since May 15th at 11:17 p.m. It belonged to one of the missing caribou, and the timestamp matched the exact moment all the signals had vanished. I've never returned to that region, and I've refused any further research assignments in that area. Some mysteries, I've realized, are far better left alone. Whenever Alaska comes up in conversation, my stomach tightens. People always imagine the gorgeous wilderness, the northern lights, The adventure, but all I can think about is that night at Copper Creek Lodge. I just finished my junior year of college and was working a seasonal job as a front desk clerk and maintenance assistant at this tiny, remote lodge near Wrangell, Elias National Park. It was June 2022, and for 3 months, this place was basically my whole life. The lodge was small 12 cabins scattered across the property, connected by gravel paths that crunched underfoot no matter how quietly you walked. Our nearest neighbor was 40 miles away, and cell service was non-existent. The only link to the outside world was a single landline in the main office, which crackled so badly that you never knew if you'd be understood. Most nights, the silence was almost suffocating, making it feel like we were the only people left on Earth. That week, the guests were mostly hikers and photographers seeking complete isolation. Among them were a trio staying in cabin 7, David, Amanda, and their friend Troy. David was loud, always joking and cracking wise during meals, while Amanda was quiet but observant, constantly taking in her surroundings. Troy was in between friendly, but mostly kept to himself. On the surface, they seemed like any group of friends enjoying the wilderness, though I couldn't shake a strange tension between David and Troy. The day started like any other. I spent it repairing a water heater in cabin 3 and restocking supplies in the main lodge. The weather was warmer than usual for June, thick with mosquitoes, and that perpetual Alaskan twilight was settling in. Around 9 p.m., I noticed David, Amanda, and Troy heading toward the bathhouse, a small wooden building about 100 yards from the lodge. Troy carried a towel, clearly ready to clean up after a long day. David and Amanda followed, and I could hear David talking loudly as they walked away. There was something about his tone that made me pause while locking up the office, but I dismissed it as normal guest chatter. Roughly an hour later, I was in my staff cabin reading when I heard voices outside. At first, I assumed other guests were returning from evening activities, but the tone was frantic. Amanda's voice pierced the night, panicked, calling out that Troy was missing. David was with her, and they moved from cabin to cabin, knocking on doors and asking if anyone had seen him. Their voices carried a tension that made my hair stand on end. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. Amanda ran toward me, pale in the dim glow, with David close behind, his expression wild. They explained that Troy had vanished following some kind of argument near the bathhouse, but their stories kept shifting. Amanda claimed a stranger had been there, lurking around. David said the same, but described someone completely different, a shorter man with a beard. Amanda described a tall man with dark hair. Their accounts contradicted each other so sharply it was like they were talking about two separate people. Amanda wrung her hands nervously, and David paced, running his fingers through his hair. It all felt off, like their panic was rehearsed. I suggested we check the bathhouse first, thinking maybe Troy had wandered off to calm down. As we walked, David kept exchanging quick, meaningful glances with Amanda that made my skin crawl. When we arrived, the bathhouse was empty, but signs of struggle were evident. A wooden bench was overturned, and scuff marks marred the dirt, as though someone had been dragged or fallen hard. Amanda cried, insisting we call the police, but David urged us to keep searching first, insisting Troy had likely gone for a walk and would return soon. His calmness felt forced, controlling. Despite my unease, we searched the surrounding trails with flashlights, calling Troy's name. Every shadow felt threatening, every sound amplified. Amanda pleaded constantly about what we should do, but David kept steering the conversation, avoiding any mention of contacting authorities. By midnight, exhausted and increasingly worried, I decided we needed help. When I told them I planned to call the state troopers from the main office, David's demeanor shifted entirely. He grabbed my arm, insisting we wait until morning, claiming Troy would come back on his own. Amanda, on the other hand, was desperate to alert his family. During their heated argument, I noticed fresh scratches on David's forearms, marks that weren't there earlier. When I asked, he claimed they'd come from brushing through bush, but they looked deliberate, like defensive wounds. That detail confirmed my suspicion. Something was seriously wrong. I'd finally convinced them that we needed to contact the authorities, and together we walked back to the main lodge, tension heavy in the air. The lodge felt unnervingly quiet as I unlocked the office door, and I could hear both David and Amanda breathing heavily behind me. When I picked up the landline to call for help, there was nothing, no dial tone, just total silence. I checked the cord, jiggled it, tested every connection, but the line was dead. David immediately suggested it was probably a weather issue, but there hadn't been any storms that day. Amanda was growing increasingly anxious, pacing back and forth, muttering about needing to get help somehow. I told them I would drive to the nearest town in the morning to report Troy missing, but David quickly offered to go instead. He claimed he knew the area better and could reach help faster. Something about his eagerness made me uneasy. I insisted that we stay together until we figured out what had happened. And that's when I noticed another loaded glance pass between him and Amanda. We agreed to wait until daylight, and I offered them the main lodge as a place to stay. Instead of returning to their cabin, Amanda agreed immediately, but David hesitated, insisting he needed to retrieve some things from their cabin. I watched him walk toward cabin 7, and the way he moved fast, purposeful set off alarm bells in my mind. I grabbed my flashlight and quietly followed him from a distance, sticking to the shadows. David was inside for about 10 minutes, but when he emerged, he carried a duffel bag far heavier than just clothing should be. Under one arm, something was wrapped in a towel, and he kept glancing around nervously as he walked back. I got back to the lodge before him, but pretended to be dozing in a chair when he returned. Amanda was curled up on the couch, though I could tell she wasn't truly asleep. The three of us spent the rest of the night in the main room, and I don't think any of us managed a moment of real sleep. When the sun finally rose around 4:30 a.m., I suggested we revisit the bathhouse in daylight to look for clues about Troy. David immediately objected, insisting we had already searched thoroughly, but Amanda stood and said she wanted to check again. After a brief hesitation, David reluctantly agreed to come. As we approached the bathhouse, I noticed David constantly positioning himself between Amanda and me, almost as if he wanted to control what we could see or where we could go. The daylight revealed details we had missed the night before. Dried liquid stains on the wooden steps, and the ground around the building was more disturbed than I'd realized. Amanda spotted a torn piece of fabric caught on a bush, but as she reached for it, David stepped forward sharply. "We shouldn't touch anything that might be evidence," he said, his voice carrying a forced authority that made me question whether he wanted to preserve or destroy it. Around 7 a.m., we heard the distant sound of a helicopter, unusual so early in the morning. David's face went pale, and he started insisting we should return to the cabin and pack up, while Amanda stared at the helicopter, a mix of relief and terror on her face, whispering that she hoped it was help. The helicopter landed in the clearing near the lodge, and 2 state troopers stepped out along with a paramedic. At first, I assumed someone else had called about Troy, but with the phone lines down, that wasn't possible. One trooper approached us and asked if we were the ones reporting a missing person. Before I could answer, David jumped in, claiming there had been a misunderstanding. Troy had just gone for a walk and would probably return to town on his own. The trooper looked skeptical and asked to speak with each of us separately. Starting with Amanda, David kept urging me to say everything was fine, fidgeting nervously with something in his pocket. Then the paramedic approached and told us Troy had been found about 2 miles downstream near the old mining road. He was alive, but in critical condition, suffering multiple stab wounds. Troy had managed to crawl to the road and signal a passing truck driver, who had contacted help via CB radio. I looked at David, and his face had gone completely gray. He stared at the ground like he wanted to disappear. Amanda began crying, but her tears weren't relief. They were pure fear. Later that afternoon, the troopers arrested David after discovering the knife wrapped in the towel he had carried from the cabin. Amanda admitted she had helped move Troy after the attack. She explained that David had snapped during an argument over money Troy owed him, and they panicked when they thought he was dead. The phone line had been deliberately cut with wire cutters found in David's bag. Amanda received a reduced sentence for cooperating, while David was charged with attempted murder. I quit my job the next day and never returned to Alaska. Sometimes, I still wake up wondering, what would have happened if that truck driver hadn't found Troy in time? Most summers, my Uncle Tim would take me on remote fishing trips in Alaska. He was the type who distrusted Wi-Fi and believed that real life only began when your boots hit the mud. That trip, we'd set up camp just outside Bethel along a bend in the Kuskokwim River, where the bank dropped in a messy tangle of roots and hardened silt. I had just turned 13 that spring and finally had my own gear rod, moots, even a small fillet knife. I felt proud, like I belonged among the adults, even if I still had to sleep in the smaller tent. It was early afternoon, and Tim had gone upriver to check some traps, leaving me with clear instructions. Don't wander too far and keep the fire going. The sun was behind a layer of clouds, softening the light and muting the sounds of the river. I settled by the water with my tackle box and a half-warmed thermos of coffee. I wasn't supposed to drink. The current moved slowly, carrying bits of moss and driftwood in wide arcs, and I watched it like it was a movie, no distractions, just the quiet hush of water and wind. Then I heard a voice calling from the trees behind me. At first, I assumed it was Tim playing a trick. The tone was friendly but strange, like someone trying not to startle a skittish animal. I turned and saw a man halfway down the slope into the brush. His camo jacket was caked in mud and looked decades old, and his wool beanie hung loose over his head. He didn't look familiar. He wasn't from the camp or the small town we'd visited. He smiled, showing a missing canine tooth, and introduced himself as a local guide moving gear for hunters. He said he needed an extra hand. Something about how rigidly he stood made me uneasy. His feet never shifted, and his hands stayed clasped behind his back, even when gesturing with his chin deeper into the woods. I asked which outfitter he worked for, and he dodged the question entirely, laughing dryly. He commented that I looked strong enough to carry some crates, pointing toward the ridge ahead. My body tensed instinctively before I fully processed why. I stalled, saying I needed my boots, but he stepped closer, almost ignoring me. Each step left deep, wide prints in the soft dirt, and I noticed the back of his pants was soaked with mud up to his thighs, not from wading through water, but as if he'd been kneeling somewhere wet. He glanced at the trail again, but there was no gear, just broken alder branches and thick brush that had clearly been pushed through recently. I said no, firm and clear, like Uncle Tim had taught me to speak if something felt wrong. For a moment, he didn't react, just stared. His face didn't change, though his jaw clenched once, and he let out a dry nasal laugh, muttering something like, "They never learn." I backed away, keeping the river behind me as a barrier, feeling an almost physical pressure to keep moving or talking. I stepped backward until I reached a log marking the path back to camp. He moved one last time, deliberate, and said in a flat, calm tone, "You don't want to be out here alone when it gets dark." It wasn't exactly a threat, just stated as fact. I didn't answer, I ran, not checking if he followed. I didn't hear footsteps, but I didn't trust the quiet. The trees felt thicker on my way back, leaning in unnaturally, and I ducked under branches that hadn't been low before. By the time I reached the tents, I couldn't tell if I'd been gone 10 minutes or an hour. Everything looked the same, but slightly off, like the world had shifted. For a moment, panic hit. I didn't see Tim and wondered if the man had reached him. Then I saw smoke rising from the fire pit and finally exhaled. A few moments later, he emerged from behind the truck, holding a greasy wrench and wiping his hands on a rag. He asked if I'd caught anything, and I told him no, and that we should start packing up early. He gave me a sharp look but didn't argue. That afternoon, we left camp. Tim stayed quiet for the first part of the drive back along the gravel road. Halfway into the trip, he finally asked what had happened. I explained everything as clearly as I could, from the man's strange behavior to the soaked pants, the missing tooth, and how he kept his hands hidden. Tim didn't react with anger. He just grew silent and focused, like he was analyzing the situation in his head, running through maps and possibilities. When we reached town, he made a quick detour to the ranger station, leaving me in the truck with the windows cracked, my fishing rod untouched in the back. That evening, back at the motel, we ate while the TV played in the background. I wasn't paying much attention until Tim turned up the volume. A missing person alert had just been issued for a 15-year-old boy named Alex, last seen near a different campsite just 4 days before, not far from where we had been. The report mentioned he'd been talking to a man in camouflage, possibly a local. Seeing the photo hit me hard. He was a bit taller than me, but there was something in his expression that felt eerily familiar, just a normal kid, out in the wilderness, probably not expecting his day to spiral out of control. I barely slept that night, thinking about how quickly things could have gone wrong if I'd agreed to go with that man, or hesitated even a moment longer. I didn't do anything heroic. I just trusted that gut feeling that made my body tense up. I still think about the way that man's voice sounded calm, almost neutral, when he said I didn't want to be alone out there. Not angry or frustrated, just certain, like he already knew how things would end. We haven't returned to that stretch of river since. Tim insisted we stick to areas closer to town for a while. I never saw that man again, and as far as I know, no one was ever caught. Alex was never found. His name pops up occasionally in forums like this, and every time it does, I consider reporting what I know again. But the truth is, I've already said everything I saw. Maybe sharing it here now is just a way to remind anyone reading. Trust your instincts, even when they don't make sense in the moment, especially when they're telling you something isn't right. I still can't explain why I didn't just turn around that day. Maybe it was denial. I didn't want to admit something felt off. Mason and I were heading to a wrestling tournament in Setna. He was 16, full of energy, always tossing his gym bag into the back seat like he owned the car. I'd taken the weekend off from the dental office, packed our things, topped off the tank at the Chevron near Kenny Spur Road, and figured we'd make good time before sunset. The drive was familiar. We'd done this route a couple of times for other school events. I told myself it would be a quiet trip, maybe even a chance to catch up with Mason without distractions. About 30 minutes south of Sterling, I noticed a pickup trailing us. Dark tinted windows, old matte gray paint, nothing flashy, just enough to blend in. It slipped into our lane behind us somewhere past the last gas station. At first, I didn't think much of it. The highways are long and mostly empty. Cars often follow each other for miles. But this truck stayed too close. I kept checking the mirror, expecting it to pass, it never did. I nudged over to the right shoulder, slowing down to let it by. The driver matched my speed exactly, staying tight, like we were tethered together. I mentioned it to Mason, trying to keep calm. He glanced up from his phone and muttered, "Creeper vibes." He wasn't wrong. I tried a few tricks, speeding up, slowing down, tapping the brakes twice like my dad taught me for tailgaters, even switching lanes. Nothing. It followed every move, deliberate, unnerving. No honking, no lights, no revving. Just that steady, pressure-filled presence behind us. The cold realization hit me. This wasn't just some distracted driver. We were being followed, and cell service was patchy in that stretch. I told Mason to pull up the Maps app and find the nearest spot with lights, a store, a rest area, anything. 10 minutes ahead, the map showed a rest stop. Barely marked, but better than staying on the road with that truck glued to us. I tried to stay calm, though my knuckles were white from gripping the wheel. The rest stop was nothing like I hoped. A gravel pull-off, one flickering street lamp, a rusted vending machine that probably hadn't worked in decades, and a single tilted porta-potty. No cars, no people, just wind rustling through the trees and the faint hum of the river nearby. I slowed and pulled in, expecting the truck to pass us. It didn't. It followed, slow and steady, like it owned the place. Mason straightened up, trying to act casual, but I could see him holding his breath. The truck didn't park beside us. It angled behind my car, blocking the exit like someone had planned it. I didn't recognize the model, maybe a late 90s Chevy or GM Key, but something about the front grille looked reinforced. Homemade, like welded bars had been added. My headlights glinted off the tinted windshield, but I couldn't see inside. No movement, no doors opening, just the truck idling quietly, low and menacing. I told Mason, "Don't get out," and grabbed my phone. No signal. Mason whispered that he was already recording, angling his camera against the dashboard without moving much. I didn't even need to tell him. He already had the camera going. Smart kid. I told him to keep recording no matter what happened. I considered tapping the horn once, just enough to startle whoever it was, maybe scare them off, even though I doubted anyone nearby would hear it. Before I could do anything, the truck's driver's side door opened slightly. Not enough for someone to step out, just a few inches. Then it closed again. That was it. No movement after. No one emerged. I couldn't make sense of it, but it felt intentional, like a signal. As if they were minding us, they were in control, watching, weighing their options. That was when the situation stopped feeling like my imagination running wild and started feeling like something carefully set up. I didn't dare throw the car into reverse. We were boxed in anyway. A steep ditch dropped off to the right, and thick trees pressed in on the left. If I tried to gun it forward over the grass, there was a real chance we'd get stuck. So I stayed put, engine on, doors locked, waiting. The truck rolled forward slightly, just an inch. That was enough to snap something in me. I shouted, "What do you want?" before I could stop myself. Mason grabbed my arm, his voice low and urgent. "Mom, don't." The driver didn't react. The engine idled calmly, like it had nowhere else to be. Acting purely on instinct, I slammed my hand down on the horn and held it there. The sound blasted through the trees and spilled out onto the empty highway. That finally got a response. The truck lurched backward, tires spitting gravel, then stopped again near the exit, angled halfway toward the road, like the driver couldn't decide whether to leave or wait us out. I didn't hesitate. I shifted into drive, aimed straight for the ditch, and hit the gas. The car bounced hard as we went over the edge, metal scraping underneath, but we pushed through the mud and clawed our way out on the other side of the rest stop. I didn't look back until we were back on the highway. When I finally checked the mirror, the truck was gone. Not behind us. Not parked. Just gone. Mason lowered his phone. We drove in silence for another 20 minutes until we reached a busier area, somewhere lit and alive. Only then did my chest finally loosen. I pulled into a crowded grocery store parking lot and had him send me the video immediately, just in case something happened to the phone. We sat there for a long time before I called the police. I didn't care if I sounded dramatic. I knew what we'd experienced wasn't normal. It wasn't road rage. It wasn't a joke. It was predatory. The trooper who responded took us seriously. When I showed him the video, his expression changed. He recognized the truck immediately. He didn't share many details, but he said the driver matched someone they'd been searching for, linked to multiple roadside harassment cases along the Kenai Peninsula. Same pattern every time, late afternoon. Women driving alone or with kids. Nothing had turned violent yet, but the behavior had been escalating. He told us Mason's footage was the clearest evidence they'd gotten so far, and it might finally be enough to move forward. We never heard what came of it. They didn't follow up, probably because they couldn't, but I've never driven that stretch of highway again, not without someone beside me and a full tank of gas. Mason stopped asking to drive alone too. He jokes sometimes that his camera saved us. And maybe it did, because trusting that instinct acting instead of freezing might be the only reason we didn't become another unsolved story. I just hope whoever was behind that wheel learned that night that they chose the wrong car.